Hello, my lovelies. You'll notice that this is a bit of a different setup than my usual recording setup. I am having some trouble with low iron. I'm a little bit anemic, and so I'm sort of recording from just a chill space in my place instead of my usual reading space. I kind of have my camera precariously here, so hopefully we'll be okay to do this video. But this was something that was requested by a subscriber. It is a video on how to tell the difference between the different Cartomancy systems. This does get asked a lot, but generally it gets asked of what's the difference between tarot and oracle, which we will go over in this video, but I also have a few other systems here that we'll take a quick look at. Now, tarot here is the one system that most people are familiar with. This particular deck is a little hard to see with the ring light, but it has the cards like the pentacles, the swords, the cups, the majors like the Hierophant, and we have the Emperor here. And so that's the deck that a lot of people are familiar with. Now, tarot itself has a very, very specific structure, and I'm just going to briefly talk about it here because I have a full video dedicated to the anatomy of a tarot deck. I will link it in the description box, so if you want to know the complete description of the structure of a tarot deck, you can go check that out. But basically, the tarot deck is divided into two main sections, the major arcana and the lesser arcana, the minor arcana. And then the minor arcana is divided into 4 suits. The 4 suits have cards ace through 10, and then they have the 4 court cards. So that is what a tarot deck in the briefest description looks like. It has to fit that structure in order for it to be a tarot deck. If it doesn't fit that structure, it's not a tarot deck. Now, occasionally you will see a tarot deck creator who throws in an extra card or two, like with the Tarot de la Nuit. There is a 23rd card in the majors, the Angel of Night. That's still a tarot deck, even though they threw in an extra card, but it's 78 cards in a specific structure. That is what makes a tarot deck. And like I said, I'll link that video if you want to go more in depth to the anatomy of a tarot deck. The second, probably most popular type of deck that people read with are oracle decks. Now, there aren't any hard and fast rules about oracle decks. Generally speaking, since I have a lot of them, I think I have about 26 oracle decks in my deck collection. They usually run in the number of somewhere in 40 cards about in a deck, give or take. I do have a deck that I did a walkthrough of here on the channel that it only has like 24, 25 cards in it. And then I have an oracle deck, which is the Tea Leaf Fortune cards, which is, even though it's based on the Tea Leaf reading system, it is an oracle deck. It has like 206 cards in it, thereabouts. I don't have the box in front of me to look and see exactly how many cards it has, but it has 200 and some cards in it. So oracle decks can have any number of cards, but generally speaking, I find most of them are in the 40s. This deck, I believe, has 40 some cards. Colette Baron Reed's Spirit Animal has 40 some cards. Everyday Witch Oracle, I believe, has about 40 some cards. That seems to be like a common target that a lot of oracle deck creators seem to shoot for. But again, it's not standardized. It can be anything. So a lot of times oracle cards will have keywords on them or a quote or a phrase for you to look at. This is the Green Witch Oracle that I have here. And so you can see we have Onion, which is about protection. We have the Lime that is about luck. We have Sweet Corn about ritual. And then we've got the Snapdragon for purification. A lot of readers, the oracle decks do come with books that give you the meanings of the cards. However, you will find that a lot of readers like myself, with the tarot, I have memorized the meanings of the cards. Yes, I use my intuition as I read as well, but there's also a lot of memorization of what the specific cards are supposed to mean. With oracle cards, because there is no standardization, it's a lot more common in my personal experience for people to read them intuitively. So they will just go off of whatever keyword or phrase or quote is on the card and just let their intuition go from there. though almost all of them do come with a guidebook that if you don't want to just go by your intuition, you can read what the creator intended the card to mean. So, like I said, they usually have something like that, a keyword, a phrase. This is the Animal Spirit Oracle by Caleb Aaron Reed. You can see that in this one, it gives you cat spirit, claim your independence. It's sort of a sentence, a phrase that you can go by. And then I also happen to have handy here, so I'll show you. Try to get it in the light well. This is from the Everyday Witch Oracle. This is Affirmations for Growth. Just so you can see kind of how the messages are. Let me see what else I have here. I also have the Goddesses and Sirens Oracle deck handy. I was doing some readings here, so I have a bunch of Oracle decks handy. Athena, Strategy. Just so you can see what some different Oracle decks are sort of like. So those are the two that people usually ask the difference about, and that's the difference between them. Tarot has a very specific structure. It's 78 cards broken into the majors and the minors, and then the minors broken down into the 4 suits. Oracle decks, sort of a free-for-all. They tend to have an image, a keyword or phrase or keywords on them, and then you can just read intuitively from there. Now, over here is another one of my favorite systems. This is the Lenormand System. Now, originally, in the very beginning, it was just a deck of playing cards that was used, but a symbol was assigned to the specific cards. And because of that, we now have special Lenormand decks today that you can buy so that you don't have to remember which playing card corresponds to what. You just get a Lenormand deck and then the symbol will be right on there. A Lenormand deck has 36 cards in it, so it does have a specific structure. It is 36 cards, numbered 1 through 36, and each deck will have the same symbol for the number. They might change the names a little bit, like I've seen Crossroads as Pathways, I've seen the Rider as the Cavalier, so they might have a slightly different name, but it's the same symbol. But you have symbols like, and I'm trying to do this so that you guys can see, the key. You've got the Cavalier, which is sometimes called the Rider, Clover, Ship, House. It doesn't really want to focus well on these, but Tree. Can we get you to focus there, camera? Nope, there we go. Tree, Clouds, the Snake. Now, there's 36 cards, each having the specific symbol for that number. And when you lay them out, there's a very specific way to read them. I have heard tarot described as very esoteric and subtle, while Lenormand is sort of like the claw end of a hammer, very blunt and to the point. Tarot can be metaphorical, whereas Lenormand is very literal. That cloud could mean an obstacle, confusion, darkness, oppression, or it could literally mean a cloud. Same thing like the book could mean secrets, or the book could mean knowledge, or the book could mean a book. It can be that literal with Lenormand. There are smaller spreads you can do, but my favorite to do, I usually either do a 5-card Lenormand spread, or I do the whole grand tableau, and that's where you lay out all 36 cards, and then I like to call them anchor cards. Some people call them significators, but you look for certain cards within the Lenormand system. For example, if you wanted to know about somebody's job, depending on how you were taught to read Lenormand, you would look for the anchor, or maybe the fox, or maybe the bear, depending on their job. If they have a managerial position, you might look for the bear. But you'll look for that, and then you read the cards around it and going out from that in a certain way to get information. If you wanted to know about an engagement or their marriage, you would look for the ring. If you wanted to know about love or romance in general, you could look for the heart. If you wanted to know about health, you'd look for the tree. So depending on what you want to look for, finances, you would look for the fish. Usually that's finances and abundance for most people. And you read from there. Like I said, tarot can be very metaphorical, whereas Lenormand tends to be very literal and blunt. It is a specific sort of system. There are, like I said, there's 36 cards with very specific symbols, so it does have a very dictated structure. There is another system very similar to Lenormand called Kipper. However, I do not read Kipper, nor do I own a Kipper deck to show you, but it is very similar to Lenormand. Positioning can be important in Lenormand. The way a card faces can be important in Lenormand. I know readers who do take positioning and facing into account when they interpret their Lenormand cards. There's only a few cards in Lenormand where I take their whether or not they're facing each other or how they fall in the deck in regard to each other. I take that as significant, but I don't do it with all of them. As I understand it from people who've explained Kipper to me, positioning is essential when interpreting Kipper. So that's kind of the difference there. I believe it's a lot of the same symbols. I don't know that they're in the same order, but Kipper is similar to Lenormand, but there are also some distinct differences. Now, Lenormand is a rather old system. The Oracle decks are rather new as far as Cartomancy goes. They are a newer thing, much more modern. Tarot, we can still see some of the old influences from Waite and Prior. Lenormand is an older system as well. It is named after Marie Lenormand, who was the sort of the first cartomancer to the stars. She read for Napoleon and his wife. But the thing is, she actually did not use the Lenormand deck, and it really has no direct connection to her. She used a combination of tarot cards, playing cards, and some cards she made on her own. But there were some people in France after her passing that wanted to capitalize on her name, and so they took the original or the originating system for Lenormand was the German game of hope. They took that and repackaged it as the Lenormand deck, named after her, to capitalize off of her fame. Then we have here, this is newer than the Lenormand deck, but still pretty old. This comes from the early 1900s, the original form of this. I do have a vintage copy of this deck that was gifted to me by a grandmother, and I keep that set aside for personal use and just sort of as a collectible. I did purchase, this deck is still in print today, and so I purchased a new one so that I could use that for my readings and wasn't taking a chance of anything happening to my vintage deck. But this system is very old. You will see some antiquated ideas and gender roles and things like that in this deck, and that's why some people aren't as keen on using this today. This is the Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards. They are very similar to the Lenormand. In fact, you will see that the ring, the park, these are all Lenormand cards, the crossroads, but then the children, the bride is a different one, the pig. They're not in the same order as Lenormand. So like number 10 in the Gypsy, which is the pig is not number 10 in Lenormand. So even though the 36 symbols that are in Lenormand are in the Gypsy Witch Oracle, they are in a different order. And this is a 52 card deck instead of a 36 card deck. So there's more cards in this deck. You also read it a little bit differently. This is intended to be read sort of as grand tableaus. There's a smaller grand tableau and a larger grand tableau. The closer the card is to the card, the significator that represents your querent, the more impact the card has, the more heavily it will weigh on the situation. The farther away, the less impact it has. But you'll notice in my Lenormand, this was the first Lenormand deck I had, and it does sort of have the meanings on the cards, which can be nice when you're just learning. But to be perfectly honest, once you start expanding your Lenormand knowledge, it kind of is distracting for me. So there's a system called houses with Lenormand. I use this deck to keep track of houses when I'm doing a reading. I actually lay it under the Lenormand deck that I'm using to do the reading. But these cards will tell you what the card means depending on how close it is to the querent and if it is near or far from other cards within the system. So it's very convenient because it does tell you on there what exactly each card means, especially in relation to position to other cards in the spread. Like I said, there's two grand tableau, like one's smaller, one's larger, and there's instructions that come with the deck on how to read those. You can read it in other ways as well. You could use really any Lenormand spread and you'd be perfectly fine. But you can see how the birds is another Lenormand system. The rider is a Lenormand symbol. But then we've got the money safe here. Whereas Lenormand is more direct, more blunt, more fortune-telly in a lot of senses. I know that's not really a word, but we're making it a word. The Gypsy Witch is very much old school fortune-telling, and so you have to accept it for what it is and use it for what it is. It is not an esoteric system. It is a fortune-telling system. The Lenormand, the various cards are generally thought of as positive, neutral, or negative. There are definitely negative cards in here. In fact, this deck actually scares some people because it does have very negative cards. And honestly, like death, we're used to death being symbolic and a metaphor in tarot. Death in this system, originally, historically, the way it was read, it means death, like literal physical death. I do not interpret it that way. I have my own modern take on it so that I can make this a usable deck for contemporary queerance. I sell a lot of these readings on my Etsy shop, and you can book one there if you're interested. But just understand that it is a fortune-telling system, not an esoteric system. I always try to, because divination to me as a whole is a spiritual tool. And so I do try to add a level of spirituality to it, but this is much more a fortune-telling system. I do find that with the Gypsy Witch, there's room for latitude and interpretation, which does allow me to add that spiritual touch here and there where I can. But like I said, the goal of this deck when it was created was fortune telling. That is what it was made for. It is made for the fortune telling mindset, the social constructs of early 1900s. The next deck that I have, this is the Sigonkartya. This is the Hungarian version of this deck, but they're generally called the Sibella decks or the Gypsy decks. And they are their own system. There are 36 cards in this. So you might be tempted to think that they are like the Lenormand or like the Gypsy Witch cards, but they are very much not. For one thing, both of these correspond to playing cards, and you could actually, if you took the time to memorize what symbol goes with what playing card, you could read either of those systems with a deck of regular playing cards. Whereas the Hungarian or the other Sibella decks do not correspond to playing cards. At least I have never seen correspondences made, and the cards do not show a correspondence to playing cards. Now, these, the Gypsy Witch and the Lenormand all have various symbols, but these sort of have people and ideas. So you can see this is in multiple languages. So depending on what you speak, I believe there's Hungarian, English, German, Italian, French, and I can't remember what else. But so it's in 6 different languages, so it doesn't matter so much as long as you speak one of those, you're good. But you've got things like the Judge, you've got love, you've got falseness, and again, this deck has negative cards. This deck has negative cards as well, very much so. And there's no beating around the bush. There's no splitting hairs over interpretation. This deck is pretty literal, even more literal than the Lenormand or the Gypsy Witch. The house often represents a physical house, or it can represent your, like your home, where you live and the people within it. Sweetheart, constancy, money, message. I mean, the message is really just about getting a message. Thought is about what somebody is thinking. Loss is often something that you lose due to your own actions. Sadness, marriage, some money, unexpected joy. You kind of get the idea of these cards. So it is a very, generally speaking, there is a grand tableau that I do with these, and I do have a how-to on how to do the rose grand tableau with this. But generally speaking, when I do this, I use one of the past, present, future readings. This is there's a lot of flexibility with tarot. There's a lot of flexibility with oracle cards. There's some flexibility with Lenormand and the Gypsy Witch, but there's really not a whole lot of flexibility with the Sigonkarya. Generally speaking, like I said, when I read them with them, it is a past, present, future, maybe past, present, future, and guidance or advice, but they are pretty literal in how they do things. They don't give a lot of extra detail. There's not a deep dive to do with any of these cards. Tarot, you could easily write a page about what a single tarot card means. But with the Sigonkarya, it's a few words. It's a sentence. It's a basic concept. There's no deep esoteric meaning. It's very straightforward, which is nice in some respects. And that's why I use it and I enjoy it. It's very straightforward. It's very fortune-telling. It's not, unless you ask a spiritual question, you're not going to get a spiritual answer out of it, because it is not about that. It is very much fortune-telling. I do not know when these decks were created, when they started being used, but I'm just going to, from my experience with History of Cartomancy, I can bet that this is probably an older system, or based off of an older system, because of the style of fortune telling that it is. I do absolutely love this deck, and I sometimes will incorporate this with other Cartomancy systems, just kind of if I'm doing something else, like my Four Kings reading, where we ask if someone loves the querent or not. They get a simple yes, no. But to give them a little more insight, a little more information, I will often draw 3 Sigonkarya cards to sort of give us the bigger picture, because they give it to us with no sugarcoating. There's no metaphor. It's very straightforward. Very straightforward. This is why you got a yes or a no. Or you got a yes, but you still need to be careful. Or you got a no, but there's still hope. That kind of thing. So these are some of the basic systems out there. Basically, you have tarot. Lenormand is its own system. Kipper is its own system. A lot of people will just say that the Gypsy Witch and the Sibella decks are just a type of oracle deck. I make a distinction because they each have a very specific structure, whereas oracle decks do not have a specific structure, and they tend to look much more like this. This looks a little like Lenormand, but it's not. But it does have a very specific structure. But there aren't other decks that are exactly the same. You will find, if you're interested in Lenormand and you're interested in this, there is a deck called the Maybe Lenormand. And it actually kind of mashes up the Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards and the Lenormand. The Maybe Lenormand is actually a 52 card deck. However, 1 through 36 are done as the Lenormand. So you can read it as a 36 card Lenormand if you want, or all of the symbols that are in this, but not in the Lenormand, then are cards 37 through 52 in the Maybe Lenormand, and you can read it as a 52 card Lenormand that way. But the symbols do not match up, even though it's 52 cards and uses all the symbols that's in the Gypsy Witch. They don't match. This deck and that deck do not match, because the Maybe Lenormand does the first 36 cards as a Lenormand deck, a regular, normal, traditional Lenormand deck, and then the extra symbols from this system appear in that deck, but they are numbers 37 through 52 instead of the numbers that they appear as in the Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards. So that is the basic difference between the decks. Like I said, if you want to know more about the tarot structure, I have a whole video just on the anatomy of a tarot deck, which I will link in the description, as I said. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. If you are new here, please subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. Until the next video, blessings to you wherever your journey finds you.